Hey there, friends, how's it going? Hope you're staying well. Hope you're staying safe in these dangerous times. I'm Neil Nagwekar. I'm project lead for the Homemakers series at tellmeastory.biz. That's tellmeastory.biz, and welcome to the eighth session of the Homemaking Talk series. In the last session, we spoke with Krishna Warrior. He was a former editor of Midday, former Reader Digest editor, and he also helped blind children in Extra CVC in St. Xavier's, Mumbai. Today we're going to go away from community, or rather, go a little beyond community and talk about city. Our topic for today is diverse Delhi homes, exploring city consciousness via magical realism. Today we intend to explore the city as home, and we intend to do it through Ipshita Nath's book, The Rickshaw Reveries. Before I go ahead, let me introduce my guest. Good evening, Ipshita.
Good evening. Nice to be here.
So the pleasure is all ours, Ipshita. Ipshita Nath has a PhD in post-colonial Indian literature. She is currently an assistant professor at University of Delhi. Her book, The Rickshaw Reveries, was published by Simon and Schuster India in 2020. Her upcoming book is on men's science in colonial India during the 19th century. She's also working on the medical and gendered histories of the British Empire in India during the 19th century and early 20th century, focusing on colonial medical literature and institutionalized medical management in relation to European women's gynecological and obstetrical healthcare practices. There's a lot to talk about here, but I think it's best to focus our analysis on the book. Uh, for those who don't know, Rickshaw Reveries is a series of 12 short stories based around New Delhi and primarily from the perspective of rickshaws. Ishita, what was the general impression you wanted the reader to feel with respect to the city of Delhi?
Um, well, for me, Delhi was never a space that was unilateral or singular. For someone like me who's lived in Delhi, a person like me who's always moved within city spaces extensively, Delhi has never been this one type of city, right? It's had different faces, it's had different versions, and what I wanted to sort of convey to the readers was that Delhi has truths and realities which often evade the gaze. And for people like you and me, and majority of the readers, Delhi will be a kind of city that is accessible only to the urban elite. And the city or any urban space, I think it would be different for the urban poor, majorly different for the urban poor. I mean, there are a lot of incidents that come to mind because Delhi has evolved over a period of time, and if we look at the past 2 or 3 decades, Delhi has not been the same kind, and the global image that has been projected specifically, that has been influenced majorly by all the development drives, all the changes that have been coming in, and have been affecting the and evolutions that Delhi has seen. I think there is a section of society that has not really benefited, or not has not even been impacted by it, has not been touched by it, right? So if we look at these let's say Commonwealth Games, right? There were so many infrastructural changes taking place, and this is one time which I remember very vividly because I was in college when this was happening, and so many changes were taking place in terms of the way neighborhoods were designed and how roads were structured, right? So we were hearing about these stories of slum areas being demolished, right? And I mean, demolishments of slum areas, I mean, they've been happening periodically, they've been happening sporadically, and there are some individual stories that come out very rarely, but they do come out. And I think that I was interested in capturing those kind of individual stories of people that don't necessarily have access to the city that, like I said, people like you and me, the urban elite or the urban educated, have access to. So I think that the objective was to capture those kind of multiple realities, because I did not think that Delhi denoted one kind of city. It's not an urban space which is which has only one voice or one face. And I think that looking at the stories of the urban marginalized, urban displaced, urban underprivileged. I think that the main motive was to capture those, individual experiences and individual narratives. I think
These
that was.
individual experiences and narratives, um, they're covered in a slightly unique way, I would say, in Rickshaw Reveries. There is a magical touch, a supernatural touch to every story. I
Hmm.
hesitate to call it surreal because that might, throw us into discussions
That's
about
my word
realism
too. Hmm.
or surrealism. But for lack of a better word, what would you say were the advantages of this surreal story structuring?
Okay, so when I started writing these stories, I mean, firstly, I did not intend for them to be fictional stories. Uh, I had aimed for them to be, non-fictional narratives or my conversations with rickshawalas around the city. And I had aimed for the book to be something like, a collage of different voices and real life stories of different men across the city, and to basically capture the problems that they go through, and or whatever stories of heroism they may have, right? Like Humans of New York, or if you look at even if it's not that positive, something modeled on Mayank Austin Sufi's book on prostitutes in the red light district of Delhi. So, I did interview a lot of rickshawala bhaiyas around campus areas and my neighborhood, which was in East Delhi. And yet, when I started writing these stories, I mean, something like fiction came out. I think it was not intentional. It was quite accidental. And while I was writing the story, the first story is the story that is the first one in the collection, and it became a testimony. It became like a tribute to one of the most enduring urban myths of Delhi, the myth of the monkey man, right? I mean, I don't know how old you were when this rumor came around, but I was in school, and I had a vivid imagination, so it impacted me greatly. And I think that when I started writing about Delhi, this story somehow came up, and I thought I'll try to rationalize it in some way, which I've attempted to, but then something surreal did happen, and that the story took the form that it did. And then when I wrote the second story, I realized that I was actually unconsciously employing magical elements. A bit of surreal tone came in, right? And then I realized that maybe it is useful to use surreal writing style and use magical realism consciously, because Delhi, like I told you, it's not unilateral, it's not uniform, and it's difficult to define it in whatever, so many words, right? It's a historic, it's a historical city. So you have vestiges of different eras within the city. In one corner you have the colonial part of Delhi, then you have the Delhi of the Lodi era, Delhi of the Tughlaqs, right? And all of them are there, and they're sitting together comfortably, and it's surreal how all of these time frames come together within the city. So it was magical to me. And I thought that it fit very well that stories about Delhi should contain some magical elements, and also some of my own experiences have a bit of weirdness and magic in it. I can tell you one incident when me and my friends, we were in Khan Market, and it was a nice autumnal evening, and it started drizzling or something, and we decided to sort of not sit in the cafe. Instead, we got the food packed, and we walked down to the Lodi Gardens. And there's a certain time limit. You're not supposed to be there beyond 8 p.m. or so, but whatever, we were college kids, we didn't really care too much about the rules. Plus, everybody liked to click their photos with their DSLRs. Like, all my friends were enthusiastic
Is
about
that
photography.
DSLR?
Yeah, like some of the rich kids in the groups inevitably have DSLR cameras, and they enjoy doing photography around, because the architecture around the city is so beautiful. So anyway, we went into the gardens, and It was quite dark. It was after twilight, and there was this area around the tombs where there were all these college kids around our age playing music, playing guitars, and it was really nice. And there was the moonlight and no other lights. Just it was quite dark. Then we just loitered around. I mean, loitering is something I think that kids your age and college kids do. I hope they do. I mean, you learn so much. So anyway, so I went into one of the tombs with another friend, and we were all scattered around. And then suddenly, while I was in front of the actual grave within that tomb, it was pitch dark. I heard a laughter of a woman, a tinkling laughter. Okay,
Wait,
and there was
from the two?
inside the tomb,
Okay.
and there was a beam of light coming in from outside because they light up the tombs with some lamps, orange lamps. So I thought
Uh,
that the beam of light was like a passageway. Maybe you can walk around the tomb, or maybe there's a staircase upstairs. So but then there was something about the laughter. It just rang once, and I told my friend, there's somebody laughing there. And he was like, who? I said, I heard a laugh. And I mean, I'm telling you like this, but then there was a urge in me to walk towards the laugh and see who it was. And my friend was like, no, let's go. Okay, he was totally spooked out. But in the moment, I really wanted to walk towards the whatever was laughing. And I don't know why I would want to laugh, walk towards somebody who's laughing. Anyway, my friend like sort of pulled me out of the place, and then I walked around the tomb. There was no window or door, and it was very spooky. And by that time, like, the rest of us also wanted to leave, and we did leave. But the mystery was never solved. I mean, why did I only hear the laughter, which was like as if somebody is just laughing inside the hallway. And my friend who's from Lucknow, she's told me all these stories about jinns and so on. So I mean, it did stimulate the imagination, these kind of incidents and accidents around city, whatever I had. uh, they influenced my writing of the city,
yeah,
and perhaps this is why I was inclined towards magical realism. Yes.
I do think that the little anecdote about the tomb and the fact that how individual that mystery was to you, like your friend didn't hear it and then they told you to
Yeah.
leave. I think it really shows in this book because a lot of the magical, the supernatural elements, the things that happen to people, the person who finds a scrap of metal, the person who
Mhm.
gets lost in the woods, all these
Mhm.
things, or the bird story, uh, there is a lot of subjectivity in the magical experience where it's this one rickshawala who experiences it, but the others don't really feel it. I'm interested to know uh, now that we're on this line of thought, I was interested to know about your writing process because,
Hmm.
firstly, interviewing rickshawalas. Rickshawalas have amazing stories to tell, but they aren't
Right.
often very willing to say it. How
Hmm.
was this process, first of all?
It was so maybe because I talked to bhaiyas around campuses, so they were probably used to talking to kids and talking to students who are usually chatty. The atmosphere around the campus areas like North Campus, it's more relaxed. So perhaps that is why these bhaiyas were okay with talking to me about their lives. And I mean, that time I was trying to also start photography blogging, so I started a page on Facebook as well. And there would be these stories of bhaiyas who. There was this one bhaiya Moneem, who was actually a carpet weaver, and there is a story about a carpet weaver in the in the book. I mean, of course, I'm not drawing entirely on their experiences, but I do let the image of the rickshawala bhaiya, who I've talked to, influence my characterization in a way. Maybe to sort of explore a character who was formerly a carpet weaver and had to come to city, and it's my imagination how I saw how they settled into the city after living in another place and
Yeah,
growing
I
up in
get
that
that.
space.
I mean, I do,
Exactly.
I do
Yeah.
concur that fiction needs to be somewhat in reality. But sorry, go
Sorry.
on.
Yeah.
I was
Also,
saying that. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
right. Right. So, I mean, what I found out was that these bhaiyas were mostly out of. I mean, they belonged to they belonged to places that were not Delhi. So they had migrated into the city, right? So, I mean, I think that that was what I wanted to capture in Delhi also, and that's part of the first question that you asked me. You know, I wanted to bring in how the city of Delhi is comprised of people who do not really belong here, and the entire experience of living in Delhi is an act in trying to belong here, right, or trying to be part of the city, right? And the as far as the writing style goes, it did help me to know about the background of this particular class of manual laborers. It helped me to get information about the neighborhoods that they live in and the problems they face, the whatever institutional problems that they face, but otherwise, I could not I could not draw too much from reality, also because I chose for magical realism. So, you know.
It's interesting because a city is often Dickens's London or whatever, often described physically and in exterior details, the height of the building, size of the
Hmm.
park.
Hmm.
In fact, I'm reminded of Virginia Woolf when she talks about Edwardian
Right.
writers, how they are materialist in nature. Was your intention to move away from that kind of story, that kind of description?
Hmm. Well, I mean, every time period, every era has seen its own type of writing that is focused around the city. So, I mean, if you look at Victorians, they wrote about London in a certain way. They understood the city space in a certain way, right? I mean, if you look at Wilkie Collins or Charles Dickens, they understood the city to be indicative of growth and revolution and industrial development, right? And poverty and sickness and crime and so on. But on the other hand, George Eliot, or if you look at Thomas Hardy, they look at the city as antithetical to the countryside, isn't it? And
Right.
they look at the city space as dark and not as beautiful and serene and tranquil as the countryside, isn't it? And then if you look at modernists, they have their own style, and Edwardians. So I mean, even after the world wars, if you look at let's say PG Woodhouse's London, for someone like Bertie Wooster, who is of certain elite group, for them London is pubs and bars and clubs and golf courses and so on. So I mean, it really depends on perhaps the taste and the experience of the writer in the way in which they choose to engage with the city. It was purely my own experience that made me understand the city as a dark space, or a space that had different faces that I wanted to bring to the forefront. So yeah, I mean, the attempt was to actually bring up some dark narratives out of the city, and not just stick to the general conception of the city as this space where there is so much light, it's brightly lit, or there's uh, modernization. I mean, there's so much ugliness also that needs to be shown, I suppose.
I do think that this modernity, this reality of certain of this entire trade of people and their gritty lives, very grounded.
Hmm.
It's expressed wonderfully, but on the one hand you have this realistic, gritty tone, and on the other hand you have supernatural elements, and there is a very fine balance to maintain. You know, to ensure that your book doesn't become epic fantasy or doesn't become Gustav Flaubert. So how is that process like maintaining balancing the magical with the real?
I did not. Firstly, I mean, I wonder if you notice that Delhi is not simply like a physical space in the stories. It's not just a context for the characters. Rickshawalas are the subjects, but Delhi is also a subject in the stories, right? So it's primary to all the narratives. It was difficult to not villainize it. It was difficult to not glorify it. I mean, yes, it was a fine balance, and it was tricky to do it at times. But I think that it was important to be honest to Delhi as it is. There was no need for me to hide the grotesque aspects of city living. It's not grotesque only for a certain class and certain category of people. It can be grotesque for an ordinary person who has access to resources. As a woman, the city can be grotesque for me in a different manner than it would be for you. So I think that I wanted to capture that. I wanted to capture the beauty and the ugliness, the absurd realities of Delhi. Like I told you, the tomb story is quite absurd, and it's when I think back on it, I feel a bit of like disbelief myself. But I'm sure that a lot of people have had experiences of the city if they've engaged with it the way I have. They can be bizarre, and these stories are bizarre for that reason.
The fact that we are unreliable narrators who see or hear or smell things that may not have happened in objective reality is a true thing.
Sorry,
You know,
I didn't catch that. Can you please repeat?
I'm so sorry. I was thinking out loud. I was saying that the fact that us creatures of nature hear
Hmm.
things, smell
Hmm.
things, see things that may not be real
Right.
in the so-called objective world.
Right. Right.
That is also real, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. And who defines what is real?
Very true.
Right. That laugh was real to me, but my friend never heard it. So I mean that it is like that. I mean, there are some other anecdotes which I mean I can share, and which tell us
Go ahead.
that.
I mean, this page is called "Tell Me Your Story," so tell us your story.
Okay, so if you've been inside the JNU campus, you'll know that there is an
Uh,
area inside campus itself which is called the PSR rocks,
yeah.
and if you walk into PSR and you walk more than you should, you go beyond the caves in those areas. You will see things that you cannot understand are within Delhi. So this one time we used to camp out in PSR rocks back when it used to be open. We used to like spend hours and up until the wee hours of morning, in fact. And there was this one time we were all lounging around and enjoying the weather, and there was a blood curdling shriek, and it just echoed through the PSR area, and it sounded as if somebody was being maimed. And all of us were taken aback, but it came from a distance, so we didn't really care that much. But then there were some eerie stories that anyway floated around. I mean, they could be campus myths and legends, but then those the shrieks, and then we would walk around the campus a lot. So this one time we walked into one of the, you in JNU you can just walk off the road and you will enter the ridges, right? So
Uh,
this one time we walked a little bit, and we walked so far that we couldn't see the, I mean, we couldn't see the road anyway, but we couldn't tell which direction we'd come from. And suddenly there was, in the dark, a peacock flew off, and it was a gigantic bird, and it scared all of us. And then one of our friends found a bone which looked like a human bone, and all these terrible stories. And then
God,
we got lost in that area, and we landed up somewhere around the teachers quarters, and it was crazy. But the point is that if you allow your imagination to maybe take you
I'm
places,
fine.
then maybe even the real things and the cold, harsh, metallic city can also feel magical. And I think that a lot of the lot of the stories allowed me to do that, explore Delhi through my imagination as well as my scholarly understanding of Delhi. I was always inclined towards urban studies, so I had read a lot of literature and a lot of criticism on Delhi. So on one hand, it was that impacting my understanding of the city in terms of the facts and logic. But as a writer, as a reader, those legends and those myths help me make better sense of the city, because how else do you understand a city that is so crazy? It's beyond logic sometimes, right?
You
So
know,
that question on reality is very pertinent, I think.
you know, maintaining the negative capability of your imagination in
Mm.
exploring Delhi is a
Mm.
tough thing in itself. But to do it through the perspective of primarily rickshawalas, people who you and I can't completely
Mm.
relate to,
Mm.
how is how is maintaining uh, how was it to narrate the stories of Delhi through their perspective?
So like I told you, I had already planned to write about rickshawalas, because I had not come across any literature on rickshawala bhaiyas. And because I used to take that mode of transport very frequently, and I ended up talking to them every now and then when I decided to write about them, I found out even more about their lives in the city and their negotiations of the city spaces. So I mean, I think it was accidental. It happened on its own for me to a great
But did you
extent.
feel any? I mean, maybe I speak only for myself,
Hmm.
but if I am writing about a 14-year-old lower class girl
Hmm.
who's the daughter of a miner, right?
Hmm.
So there's nothing I can relate to there. It's a
Yeah,
completely alien existence. Did you feel any anxiety in saying
I
their stories while not being them? You
right.
know,
I had doubt because I was assuming because these are also most of them, some of them I think are first person, and others are like there's an omniscient narrator telling the story of another individual. So there was anxiety in that sense, whether I was able to do justice to those men. But I think that it was important for me to do justice to Delhi and exposing those facets of the city that, like I said, escape our gaze. For the majority of the readers, they don't witness Jahangir Puri. They don't come across some of the ugly neighborhoods that are there in the book. And I think that I wanted to maybe shock the readers into acknowledging that Delhi is much more than the pretty tourist spots around the city, or Horse Khas village, or whatever, Connaught Place, or there's so much more. And I think that helped me. But yes, it was challenging. It was difficult. It was
you
risky.
know, uh, expressing Delhi. Um, this may be just me. I think it is just me. Because you have said something to the contrary not too long ago. The world of Delhi or of the Rickshaw Reveries, to me, mirrors a sort of impersonal metropolitan, whether it's
Hmm.
love, whether it's
Yeah.
money, whether it's honoring your parents' heritage. The
Hmm.
person solves their conflicts alone or they fail. Can you point out examples uh, where a sort of approach like this can be more hopeful or can be
Oh.
avoided?
um Well, the idea was to actually show Delhi as an impersonal space. It's the cityscape is a space where which sort of consumes the people that live within it, in a good way, in a bad way, whatever. It depends on the position that the person occupies, right? Like I said, there would be a difference in the way the urban elite will occupy an urban space, and the way in which a marginalized group will occupy spaces, right? So for instance, like I was saying, because of the demolitions and all the eviction drives that were taking place in the early years of 2000s, there were a lot of communities, a lot of slum areas that were removed, right? And those people were just like their houses were demolished and they were pushed out of those specific slum settlement areas, right? But there was no rehabilitation, or there was hardly any rehabilitation, so those people had to move away to another area and then squat in those areas yet again. So for people like these, for them the city is a space that indicates contested spaces where their citizenship is not uncontested, it's not unquestioned. For them, it is a space where they can perhaps find some kind of redemption, but at the same time, those are spaces that can consume them as well, that can destroy them as well. So I think that this sordid reality of Delhi was on my mind when I wrote those stories, and that is what was the attempt at portraying the characters in all the grim situations. And I don't think there's any positive story in the collection. There's only, can you think of any story? There's no
I was
positive
thinking
point.
of, I think there were two stories that came to my mind. One was Subterranean Love,
Okay.
and the other one, we have the book in front of me, The Lover in Firozshah Kotla. I felt that there
Okay.
were, I mean, there is a, without giving spoilers to the audience, there is a supernatural event that occurs at the most tragic moment that
Hmm.
sort of makes it less tragic to happy or at least bittersweet, which at least ends it on a high. So I did feel that there were hopeful stories. In fact, I felt that for every tragic story there was a hopeful story. It was
You
like,
found the lover of Firosha Kotler hopeful. That is one of the more morbid stories. I mean, yes, subterranean love, but in subterranean love, they escape Delhi. They cannot find fulfillment in the city,
ah,
right?
okay.
Right. And in Firosha Kotla, that's the jinn story. And, like I told you, my friend has told me so many stories about jinns. So I had to incorporate something of that into the collection. And in that, there are a number of murders that take place. So how is it positive?
I don't know. I think I found the ending quite hopeful. Also, the I don't recall the name, but I think the story with the pigeons sort of ends on a high note. The story
Uh,
with the pigeons and the race with the birds
Pigeons.
and the race.
Okay.
I think it's called Kabutar Bazi, if I'm not
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I found that quite hopeful. Uh,
They
it
too
seems
get
like
murdered. I mean, they too get killed in the end.
they do, but I did see them as antagonistic figures towards the end. Anyway, let's not give
Right,
spoilers to our
right,
audience.
right.
Maybe I'd like to ask a more tangential question related to this. We have love, we have envy, we have anger, we have all these strong primordial emotions
Hmm.
in this book. Uh, did you feel that it was easier to express these primordial emotions because of this new writing style?
Hmm. Yeah, actually, that is true, because I mean, the first thing that uh, my the one who read the stories, the first my first reader, my sister, in fact, she told me that the stories are very bold, and then when I sent the stories out for publication, again I was told that the stories are very bold for a woman. And I was I was what, 26 or so when I sent out the stories, and there are vivid descriptions of, like you said, primordial emotions, sex, lust, and all of these things. And there so many obscenities that I have incorporated, because Delhi's bhasha is that kind. It's not possible to capture conversation in Delhi without using that authentic bhasha. So I think that all I wanted to do was stay honest to what I believed Delhi was, and what we anyway know of Delhi through mainstream media, right? So it did help to just make sure that I wasn't afraid of any kind of criticism or backlash, and just write. And thankfully, a lot of other people probably feel the same way about Delhi. So there was no backlash as such, but like there was some raised
I would
eyebrows
call
whether
it
my
a
family
bold. I would call it a
specifically.
bold assumption.
No, my family was pretty scandalized. I mean, this is the first book and all, so everyone wanted to read it. um, yeah.
Chita, I'm so sorry you crossed our half an hour mark some time ago, but
Mhm.
I don't want to let you go without a final request.
Mhm.
Is it possible for you to read a small passage from your book?
Okay. Which one? Unfortunately, I'm very bad at this. Let me see. Mm, I had to read a section for another session, and then I just couldn't decide which. Okay,
Oh,
all right. So this is the lover in Firosha Kotla, and
okay.
let's read the section which is particularly dark. All right, dark clouds had gathered on top of the ruins of the fort of Tughlaq. The rest of the city was covered in dust, but it seemed like it would rain right where Hussein stood on the roof of the Kotla. He was gazing blankly into the sky, so uncannily mirroring his heart. Faisal's sweet boyish face hovered before his eyes, blocking out everything else. Moments later, he came to his senses. He did not remember how he had got there. Standing at the edge, he looked around the gardens numbly. This was where he and Faisal had their first proper meeting. His chest constricted painfully as he fought back a scream. In the privacy that the rains afforded him, he allowed some tears to roll down his cheeks into his beard. After several moments, he looked around again. The place was entirely deserted. Then he looked down at the Bauli into the churning waters. The inkiness was strangely inviting as the water swirled in the downpour. Then suddenly something rose up and floated around just under the surface of the water. Through the mist, Hussein could not make out what it was. He squinted, squeezing the rain out of his eyes. Then he realized what it was. The body was bobbing face down, turning around as a fish swam around it, frantic because of the alien body they did not recognize. Vomit rose inside him. He watched in horror as the form drifted stiffly to the edge of the well, where it got stuck in the weeds and remained in the shadows. Even in the haze, he could recognize the bright red shirt of the petite figure. He knew the body would remain afloat until it was discovered after the showers.
The
Yeah.
body was Faisal, right?
The fish are actually there in the Bauli and they're huge. And if you look up from that spot which I've described here, it looks very uncanny and dark. Yeah.
Oh, oh, that's incredible. Thank you so much for reading the text. So, thank you for
Thank you.
taking time this evening, to be honest.
Thank you very much.
I'm really glad to have this chat with you. Unfortunately, it's time to wind up now. I'd just like to end with a quick reminder that Tell Me a Story calls for submissions on the story from Homemakers. I've been reading some of these stories over the past 2 or 3 days, and some of them are unexpectedly hilarious. If your story is good enough, it may be published via Amazon. The deadline is 20th September. There's only 10 days to go. Registrations are also open for the writing program season 3 in association with Simon and Schuster. Find the details for both on tellmeastory.biz. That's tellmeastory.biz. Right. Our next session is tomorrow. This time tomorrow, it's a solo discussion with Ritu Diwan. The topic for that is the communities of the urban underprivileged. We will be exploring in detail how the urban poor, mostly in Mumbai, but perhaps also in other states, have been living throughout this pandemic, how they have been living in general. Our guest speaker, Ritu Ma'am, is Vice President of the Indian Society of Labor Economics. We're going to talk about slum homes in India. But for now, Ipshita Nath and I will take your leave. Thank you, Ipshita, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for our
Bye
audience for half an hour of their time. Stay well.